Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Complexity Lounge, a meetup where we gather to talk about all things related to complexity and complex adaptive systems. I'm Jocker Selberg, and I co-host the lounge together with Barbara Frontera and Tiani Jones. Today, we welcome Dr. Gemma Jiang to the Complexity Lounge. Gemma is a team scientist at Colorado State University. She holds a Ph.D. in complexity leadership from Clemson University, and she brings her expertise to the field of team science, where she helps cross-disciplinary research teams collaborate more effectively. Today, Gemma will guide us through three practical applications of polarity thinking, grounded in complexity theory, leadership practice, and lived experience. Today, we'll explore how navigating polarities such as linear, nonlinear, change stability, and diversity unity can help us expand our sense-making and unlock new pathways for collaboration and growth. So, Gemma, welcome to the lounge.
Thank you, Jaka. And thank you, Barbara and Tiani, for hosting such a lively space. And I always look forward to the lounge. And I'm absolutely humbled to see so many people I regard as teachers in the field here in the audience. And also, I'm noticing, and you know how in network they say close a triangle? You know how if I'm connected to two people, try to make those two people connect as well. And several triangles is closed for me here, right here in the space. So it's really special and absolutely delighted to be here with you. And let me share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah? Okay. So our topic today is polarity thinking, patterns that illuminate complexity. This is really where several streams of my life come together, both intellectual and personal life. So, okay. The session flow today, we have beautiful 2 hours together. What a treat to borrow Yulia's word. So we're going to have like 5 main sections. So I'm going to start with the context to share with you 2 storylines that led me to where I am. And then the framing. So why would I put the 2 keywords, polarity and complexity, together? And then we will have some experiences where I would love everybody to have a felt sense of polarity, right? So this is not just an intellectual exercise, it's an embodied experience. So I hope to finish all these by the end of the first hour. So at the beginning of the second hour, we can start focusing in on complex leadership theory, which is what I studied in my doctoral studies. And I really see a high relevance between the complexity leadership theory and the polarity thinking. And then we'll end with a resonance conversation where we'll basically talk about whatever we want to talk about. Okay, so that's the plan for today. Okay, so in terms of a context, I would say really 2 streams come together to inform very strongly where I am, where I stand in terms of this topic. So one is Chinese culture. So for me, the Chinese culture is a lot more than like what you breathe in the air. So of course I'm Chinese, I'm born and raised there until in my mid-30s when I came to the US for graduate studies. So it's very much, the oriented as a Chinese person. But for me, it's a lot more than that because it really, it's really foundational to how I relate to the world. So the quick story is both my parents passed away by the time I was 10. So that was like an earthquake in my inner system, right? Completely kind of shattered my inner system. And the rebuilding started when I was 18, when I started to be exposed into classical Chinese culture. And so that's how it's kind of like a very nutrient-rich replacement of what a family would have given me, and really set the foundation to how I relate to the world. And in terms of Chinese culture, there are 3 main pillars, right? So Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And Master Nan is a very learned man that I subscribe to, and he used to use the analogy that says Confucianism is like a grocery store, right? So you need that every day for substance. And the Taoism is like the pharmacy, right? When you're sick, you need that. And then Buddhism is like a department store. It has so much. You better know what you want before you get there. Otherwise, you could really get lost. So this is kind of the relationship between these 3 pillars. And I would just have to say, like, to say that I was relating to Confucianism a lot more than Taoism until I was well in my 30s. It actually just only the recent few years that Taoism is really starting to kick in for me. So this comes at the polarity, the most ancient symbol would be the yin and the yang. I'm only starting to relate to it recently. And the way I think about the two of them is almost you can think of them as the Confucianism and Taoism as a polarity between linear and nonlinear, right? So Confucianism, at least the way it is interpreted and applied since 2,500 years ago, is a lot more linear. So a lot more about like being in the world. Whereas Taoism is a lot more nonlinear, right? About how to be, but not of the world. So my brain is kicking nonlinear since probably the studying of complex leadership helped as well. So, but anyhow, the point is, if at any point you feel like you're not relating to our topic today, polarity, and the more of the circular way of thinking, and you're not alone, right? If nothing else, this talk can help plant a seed that hopefully will germinate when the conditions are right. So, and I'm also like very, very excited. I'm going to write a series of posts on Medium where I write my thoughts on just how the different classical Chinese values as expressed through Confucianism and Taoism, and how you can relate to them from the polarity lens. And that lens just this polarity brought so much clarity to what I already am very familiar with. So that's the Chinese culture stream. And the second stream is the complex leadership. And this is what I studied in my doctoral studies. So my doctoral advisor, Russ Marion, is one of the 3 researchers that coined the term complex leadership theory in 2007 in a paper. And then 10 years later, in 2017, it won the best paper in the past 10 years from academic management. So it's really quite a influential paper, its influence is probably more confined within the academic field. So one story I would like to share between classical Chinese culture and complex leadership was when I was, a young doctoral student. I was so excited about what I was studying, and I was talking with my aunt, who is the person that taught me a lot about the Chinese culture. She's a caregiver in the orphanage I grew up in. So I was just like, because complexity is like you could never figure it out, right? So it's always changing, evolving, just intriguing, enticing. So just sharing it with her, and she said, "Now I just want you to remember this." She said, "You cannot understand complexity without understanding simplicity." Wow, was that like a lightning bulb moment for me, right? So it manifested, that wisdom manifests in 2 ways. So one is like the simple truth of life, right? So in Tao there's this quote that said, when it comes to knowledge, the more the better, but it matters concerning Tao, the less the better, right? So this is this opposing process, which I think is a very specialized polarity, like category of polarity. So it's like, so the first wisdom helped me not to get lost in the intellectual cloud, right? But be really grounded and embodied in what I'm learning. And the second way this simplicity, complexity manifests in me is, I was like, are there simple languages and stories and analogies and images that we can use to get the point through, right? So many of the complexity talk, it's so complex, the language, right? So just a case in point, in preparation for the talk, I went back to review all the main papers in complexity to make sure, I know what I'm talking about. So all those papers are very familiar to me. They're like visiting with old friends, really enjoyable. But boy, did it use a lot of intellectual horsepower. My mind certainly knows it's been through like a good workout by the end of the several day study. I was thinking to myself, who is going to sit and read this dense concept, dense theoretical framework if they're not earning some kind of a degree from it? So what practitioner is going to sit there and read it, right? So this is another way this simplicity manifested in me. Is this is really a very strong, professional aspiration for me is, can we use simple languages to get the points through? So that is these these two streams that led to where I am, and I hope to be able to do this for you today. And more recently, so as Jocko introduced, I'm a team scientist. So what that is so you would say you would have like I would say probably 80% of my projects are either funded by the National Science Foundation or the National Institute of Health. So you can imagine, this administration is really causing a lot of this destruction in my field. But probably I would say at the turn of the century, the 21st century, the federal government started to fund big teams. Right? Before they used to fund individual principal investigators. Now they're funding big teams, and it can range from, a regular team size of less than 10 people all the way up to 40, 60 people. So they would need somebody to help them think through how they collaborate, the teamwork side of things, their leadership practices, their organizational practices. So that's what I do. So you will see me bring a lot of examples from the team science context, because that's where I practice. And then the latest thing, earlier this year, I received a certification from the Key Polarity Indicator. So this is the KPI different than Key Performance Indicator, right? So I was like, boy, this KPI has a lot to do with that KPI. So it has a leadership assessment tool, and then it also has an accompanying coaching tool called the Polarity Navigator. And I would have to say this KPI really empowered me to bring this polarity thinking into the mainstream of my work and practice. Before I talk quite a lot in my different communities of practice about Tao and yin and yang, and especially one polarity I'm very interested in, diversity and unity. But I say they are usually confined to what I call lunatic fringes. I say that was lovingly because how in your work sometimes you just have to do what is asked of you, but in your side community you have your passion. So that was where people like you guys who were willing to listen to it, I would talk about it. But there was always this disconnect. But this KPI really helped me to bring this ancient wisdom from the Chinese culture that I have very, very much part of me into this modern world and into my team science practice and the professional coaching, leadership development work. So this is kind of like this context of where I come from. Okay. So then we're gonna start with the framing. We're gonna go to a framing. So what I mean by polarity and why I would put some simplicity and complexity together. Right? So like I have already alluded to with my aunt's wisdom, simplicity, complexity, right? So polarity is a simple and enduring pattern at the heart of complexity, right? Navigating with polarity thinking brings surprising clarity. Really, actually, one of my doctoral advisor, Dr. Marian's definition of intelligence is the ability to detect patterns. I would really say patterns, like this quote, for simplicity that lies this side of complexity, I would not give you a fig, but for simplicity that lies on the other side of a complexity, I would give you my life. So I would really say the patterns is really the simplicity that lies on the other side of a complexity, right? So it just illuminates, it just illuminates, it helps navigate as we help us navigate complexity. And I actually often jokingly say that polarity is actually at both sides of complexity. So, and here's this quote from Dao Jing that is really foundational for me to understanding this simplicity, complexity, polarity, right? And it said, Dao gives birth to one, and one gives birth to two, and two gives birth to three, and the three gives birth to the 10,000 creatures. And the 10,000 creatures carry in and embrace yang, flowing together in harmony. So, right? So that is, it's like polarity is on this side of complexity because it gave birth to the 10,000 creatures, right? So what is Tao? Tao, like we can say it is the creative impulse in the universe, right? It gives to one, and that is the unity of all creation. Right? So it's like one way of saying is like we are all one soul embodied in different bodies. So there's a tremendous unity that envelopes all creation, right? And then one gives birth to two, and that's the polarity. When there's male, there's a female. When there's night, there's day. When there's mountain, there's water, right? So 1 gives birth to 2, and then 2 gives birth to 3, meaning the 2, they are not static, right? So they interact with each other, and from there, new entities are created. And then 3 gives birth to 10,000 creatures. It just continues to derive, right? So, and then polarity is also on the other side of complexity because when we're living in this world of complexity, polarity helps us go backward, right? Go from complexity to simplicity, see the pattern so that we can get a grasp of what are the fundamental mechanisms that is driving the process. Okay. So here are some key features or characteristics for the relationship between the two poles in the polarity that I think is absolutely essential to understand. If we can grasp this, and that just helps us understand that it describes the pattern, right? So the first is the seemingly opposing, right? So by the way, I just want to point out here, this paradox, these two, what's these two dots? What do we call this dot? Is this not a what's this? Period or just this dot? Anyhow, just this semicolon. Is that semicolon? Yeah, semicolon or something. So just these two semicolon. Sorry, I'm having a Chinese moment. Can't quite remember how you call this thing. So right, so this is a term, this is a thing I adopted from my training with KPI from NR. So I just love it because sometimes, because we think it's called a paradox, right? Because because language is important. Sometimes when we refer to polarity, we use versus, right? And that emphasizes the opposing nature between the pole. And sometimes we call them and, right? And then that only emphasizes the interdependent nature of the thing. So, but the thing is, the relationship, they are both opposing and interdependent. That's what makes it so perplexing, right? So the paradox is a new symbol to. It's like paradox, as in paradox, because that's another way in the Western language we call this thing is a paradox. It's almost similar to polarity, right? So that sign really to me it captures the essence of both opposing and interdependent, and they can also be complementary and mutually reinforcing. So this is the key thing to know: it's a positive sum game. It's not a zero sum game, right? So if a zero sum game would be either or. So, and this is a both and relationship, and they're intertwined. One is in the other, right? So there's not really, you can't really fully separate one from another, right? Even though the mind might want to do that, but in reality, one is in the other because they are in unity. They're inseparable aspects of a greater whole. Right? And there is the 3, 2 gives birth to 3, right? There is a third way, the possibilities for transformation, which is the light side of things, or the space for ambiguity and confusion, the shadow side of things. While we're talking about polarity, we might as well talk about both the light and the shadow side of things, right? And all of those, both, they are in the relational in-between space, right? So they're not either pole. It's not that change is better than stability or stability is better than change. It's like our agency to influencing this polarity lies in the in-between space, in how they're interacting and relating to each other. So these are some key characteristics that I think is really fundamental that we know. And I would say the whole talk is to just like bring to ground how these relationships play out in real life. Okay, so let's start with some examples and stories. Okay, so one of the polarity examples we can use is linear nonlinear. So I thought this community would really relate to this well, right? Because a lot of times we say complex data systems, they're also nonlinear systems. So there are 2 ways I think about what is linear, how to define linear nonlinear relationship. So one way is the relationship between input and output, right? So in a nonlinear system, a small input can lead to a big output, right? Like this famous butterfly effect, right? A butterfly flapped its wing in Brazil and it caused a hurricane, a tsunami in Japan, right? So, or on the other way, a big input can lead to a small output, right? You think about a lot of the change efforts the organizations we see, so much effort, money, time put in it, and with very little results, right? So that would be another another direction of nonlinear. And then another way to think about nonlinear relationship is between cause and effect, whether there's a big distance in time and space, right? In nonlinear systems, a lot of times the cause and effect are very distant in time and space. Like, for example, something maybe your father taught you when you were 7 years old, it still having influence to you now, right? Or like, the quote that I told you the experience I had with my aunt 10 years ago, it's still influencing me today, right? So it's nonlinear systems. So, like in terms of application and how this might play out. So so we talk about the agency and intent, and one of the benefits of understanding the polarity is we can very intentionally create balance in our life, right? So in this linear, nonlinear, like for example, in my life. So I work in mostly nonlinear systems with these science teams, right? So they take on big challenges, and I don't see the impact immediately. Right? So I don't know what we talk about today in the meeting. What is the impact? It might manifest itself like way away in time and distance that I don't see. And that can be psychologically distressing. You're giving an echo into the mountain, and you make a noise and you don't hear the echo until years back. That's really distressing. So one way for me to bring in the balance, create the balance, is by intentionally introducing more linear activities, right? Like recently, I'm taking up embroidery. I already made 30 pieces of work. Can you believe it? Just since like last Christmas. So I mean, it's very linear, right? Because every stitch you make is right there, and it's so comforting to me, right? Other things like cooking, weeding, and I remember one of my favorite authors, and she during COVID, she said, with so many nonlinear influences that is acting on the individual, right? So she said what grounded him was housework. Just everyday focus on keeping the house clean and cooking. All those things help, right? So that is one way of restoring the balance in the linear, nonlinear, right? Within our own sphere of influence in the individual's life. So, and another example I can give that is more in the professional realm is like what's going on in team science right now, right? So, like with this new administration, it has absolutely raised havoc in my field. Proposals returned without review, proposals declined, current projects canceled and scopes reduced. This have happened all of it has happened within my portfolio project, right? So like it's really causing a lot of distress. So I mean, one way that the way I'm making sense of it is it can be all bad. Why? Because one way of defining disruption is the opportunity for nonlinear influences open up again, right? So because science, like as I'm experiencing, at least, how do you say, straddling these two huge bureaucratic system of the federal government and the academia, it's becoming so linear, right? So I mean, the whole academic world is about publishing, and the whole federal government world is about reporting, right? I mean, that's where the most energy comes up in the teams I work with, is when there's a report due or when there's a publication that is coming out, right? So, I mean, like NSF's slogan is to push the boundary of discovery. But pushing the boundary of discovery is going into the unknown, is inherently a very nonlinear activity. It just isn't. The way it is done right now, it's just not congruent to the mission science is up to. That's why I say it can be all bad. Maybe this disruption opens up space for people to think nonlinearly and act nonlinearly, and maybe some intervention that can come up can really help transform the way science is done, right? So this is like some example to bring this to life. Okay. So another Another pair that I think is very relevant is connection boundary. And that is new learning for me probably in the past few years to think like for the health of a system, right? We need both. A system needs to have a healthy boundary, what is in the system, what is not. And it needs to be connected, right? Complex type system, they're open systems. So it needs to be connected with other systems. So this is actually a polarity connection boundary. I never realized it before until a mentor of mine pointed out to me. And then, very quickly I can very quickly see just like when teamwork goes wrong, like where is attention needed, right? So for example, with the team science, with the teams I work with, when teams lean too much into connection, right? One of the symptoms I would see is you would go to a meeting with like a lot of people, like nobody really has a clear understanding of why they're in the meeting, right? So the thing is like, you just come and you just come and you just come, right? Maybe you can be a little helpful, or maybe if you hear this, it's gonna be help. It will be helpful for you, right? So it's like it contributes to this meeting bloat, right? So it's like so you will go to meetings and people have their cameras off and you don't know what they're doing, right? A few people are talking, so I was like, why are all these people here and what are we talking about? What's their relevance to this meeting? Right? So like I often say nobody is neutral in a meeting. If they are not contributing and they're not neutral, they are draining energy. Right? So you will say teams, this overemphasizing connection and just having these like really ineffective meetings. Right? So there's where I know, okay, so boundary, we need to introduce more boundary to the meetings to help enhance its effectiveness. Right? And then on the other hand, I know when teams are leaning way too much into boundary and we need to bring more connection when they are slipping back to their disciplinary silos, right? So all the teams I work with, they all have explicitly stated cross-disciplinary collaboration. But it's not easy, a lot easier said than done. So it's like you can see just how, in the beginning there is the stated enthusiasm about collaboration, and then how it just goes down and people goes back to their silos. So like this, for example, end of June, I had a business trip to Colorado where I was working with a team. It's an institute funded by the National Science Foundation. It's $10 million for 5 years, and they are entering the year 5 of their grant the last year, right? So what's their biggest challenge? Integration, right? Disciplines are back to their silo after 4 years. So we had a meeting. We used a process called strategic doing, which I'll tell you more about. And the explicit purpose is to bring back into disciplinary integration. It's so interesting that the integration focuses actually was almost exactly the same as their proposal 4 years ago when they got funded. Right? And that's how T.S. Eliot say, you would always go back to where you started, but you would discover the place for the first time. Right? So these are the examples of how polarity, how we may intentionally create balance when connection and boundary. And it's the same in personal life. You see a couple and you see when relationships break down, like in romantic relationship, you can quite easily see whether it's because they leaned too much into connection, that they're suffocating each other, or they're leaning too much into boundary, that they're just like apathy developing between the two people. And I have a couple of friends who recently celebrated their 30-year wedding anniversary, and they almost did not make 3 months. Why? Because when they first got married, they moved in with the wife's parents, right? They were living in the wife's parents' in-law apartments. And the wife's mother keeps telling the daughter what to do with the new husband, right? And they were fighting all the time, and they were almost on the verge of divorce. And then the husband said, "Let's try living on our own." Right? And for sure, they just celebrated their 30-year anniversary. So that was the example when the new system's boundary was violated, right? So, and when they established their own boundary and the system started to thrive again. So that was that example. And a third example I will give is diversity and unity. So this is a fun thing when you travel across culture, right? So when I came to the United States, all everybody ever talk about is diversity. And I look at the people in front of me, I was like, how could you all think you need more diversity? When every meeting is almost like a little United Nation, people from right? I mean, that's one of the greatest strengths of the United States. It's just such a beautiful array of diversity of all the human species on the planet, right? So it's like, what you all actually need is more unity, So I remember one of the U.S. China talks. I went to one of the U.S. pretty high ranking U.S. politician who has a lot of expertise in China, and he said, you will be very surprised when you go to China. There actually is a national agenda. And remember, I was living in Shanghai in 2010. 2010 Expo, the World Expo, and probably about around 2008 or whenever, a few years before, the government said in order to prepare for the Expo, we need two or three, several new subway lines, right, to accommodate the traffic. And within 2 years, all lines are up and running. Right? And I have a friend who was going, around that time, I had a friend visiting me who was going to NYU at that time. And he said, well, New York City has been talking about new subway lines forever, and it is still not running, right? So that is the diversity unity, with the unity agenda, right? Versus in China, I mean, all you hear growing up is we need to work together as one people led by one party. We need to demonstrate unity. So I was like, how can China have more unity than what it already has? It's like a unified culture, one party, one ethnic group dominantly. So how could it have more unity? What it really needs is more diversity, right? So you just see how even at a big, at national level, how the national agenda or the rhetoric can just lean way too much into one pole, right? And then what it does, it kicks us into the overuse of the pole, and then we get stuck, right? And what is needed is really bring more energy from the other pole. And in my field, we think about so in my field, one example I can give in this cross-disciplinary field is the identity, So usually, one project I work on is called imageomics. You know how the genomics and image. So basically, the imageomics, the idea is to use computer vision to capture pictures of the wildlife, and then use machine learning to analyze the pictures, and then from there you derive biological traits, biological information, right, to be able to tell what species is what just from images. So it's called imageomics. So it is a very close collaboration between biologists and computer scientists, right? So come to the diversity, unity, polarity. Where do you anchor your identity? Is it more in the diversity pole that you are either a biologist or a computer scientist, or do you anchor yourself more in the unity pole that your identity is part of the emerging new field that this $15 million of funding is seeking to establish, called imageomics, and that makes a huge difference back to the connection, the boundary. So that makes a huge difference in how these researchers show up and how they relate to each other. So I mean, the disciplinary butting head is a daily thing that happens, right? So versus if individuals could adopt both identities, right, to just respect the way how polarity works, you are both and. You are both a biologist or a computer scientist, and you are part of the imageomics. And depending on when the system needs more connection, and you put your unity identity as a primary identity. When the system needs more boundary, and you put your diversity identity as a primary boundary, right? So that's actually one of the best comments I received from a client. I said, "What do you think is my unique strength that you don't see often in other people?" And he said, you really have people trust you very, very fast. So the way you think about the team scientist is almost like a traveling nurse, right? So you just got to you go to teams, you enter teams, and a lot of more often than not, these team members already know each other. They have had experience to work together, and I'm the only one person new. So how do I establish trust fast without the pre-existing relationships? And these I relate to team members from the Unity identity. Is that there's a reason, there's a purpose that brought this team together, and we're all here to serve this purpose. So this is usually how I enter the team, and that really gets me by the immune systems that usually are existing in the organizations, right? Very quickly establish the trust. And then of course I also exercise my diversity identity. I bring this leadership perspective that help with the teaming that is very much needed in this enterprise. Right? So these are just some examples and stories that I hope illustrate the characteristics that we talked about. Okay, so this is other than this yin yang symbol that we're all very familiar with. I think this polarity wave is another very beautiful image to demonstrate the relationship. So you think about up here, so the top is one pole and the bottom is another pole. We just use yin yang as a symbol to see it, okay? So within a certain range, there are the benefits of both of the poles, right? So that is when you are in the productive zone, or we can say when there is a balance, right? And then when you lean too much into either pole, you are leaning into the overuse of it, and that kicks you into the unproductive zone, right? And I think this image is so easy to relate to because we all have this physical experience of being imbalanced, like when we walk, especially for toddlers we see, right? Or when we ride bikes or when we surf, right? So there is a range of motion that we can be in, that we are imbalanced, and we're upstanding and we're walking or we're biking or whatever, right? And then when we get beyond that range, probably everybody who knows how to ride a bike has the experience of falling off the bike, right? Or toddlers walking have the experience of falling off. And when we get up beyond a certain range, we fall off, and that's in the unproductive zone, right? So that is like this one of these key how do you say areas where we can apply our agency is how can we intentionally maintain this balance and create this balance between these poles, right? In whatever situation, depending on whatever polarity pair is at play. Oh, okay. Okay. Time for some experience, have some experiences so that we can have a felt sense of it. So first, what are some examples of polarities expressed in the human body? Just type it into the chat, or if you want to speak up. Breathe. Sleep, wake, inhale, exhale. Exercise, rest. Life, death, season change, the brain. Okay. Anybody wants to just unmute and say what characteristics of polarity do you see in the act of inhale and exhale that we call breathing? Because that is the most iconic one. Anybody?
Yeah, I have what comes to mind. I put purity and impurity in the chat, but I think it's less that than Or what I mean by that is like there's something that's life-giving and something that's life-taking. Like if you don't let the oxygen converts and it has to be expressed.
Mm, mm. Even when it comes to inhale, exhale?
Yeah.
That's very nice, right? So when we inhale, there is oxygen comes in, right? And if we only inhale, we don't exhale, and then the carbon dioxide is too much, right? And the other, right? So one feature is expressing is there's the benefit and there's also the overuse, right? So that was one feature. Another feature, do you see they're opposing? Are they opposing? They're opposing, aren't they? One is this way, one is this way. Are they interdependent? They are, right? So, I mean, one can't be without the other. Well, is there a transformational third way we call it? Well, we call it breath. You know, breath is like this whole, this unity that envelopes inhale and exhale, right? And is there one in the other? Can anybody really tell when exhale finishes and inhale starts? Can anybody like go to the end of the world of exhaling and then you do inhale? You will be clapped. You'll collapse. The pressure will break you down, right? There's never really a clear distinction, right? So, okay. Yes, and then with all the analogies that we can learn from that. Okay, there's all, I mean, you all come great examples. Sleep, wake. There's so many polarity that happening in our body, right? Okay, so that's a example. Okay, so a second example is this. So this is the leadership KPI, key polarity indicator assessment that I told you about that I got certified in. And it assesses 6 pairs of polarity, right? Action, reflection, stability, change, challenge, support, exude competency, exude warmth, task focus, relationship focus, direct, empower. Okay, so I mean, this is just an intuitive sense. Everybody can relate to this polarity, to this just very intuitive sense, right? So maybe a reflection is, which polarity do you navigate with ease, and how does that show up in your life? Right? It's to use another body function is like 2 hands or 2 legs. 2 hands. You know, which polarity are you more ambidextrous? Just type that into the chat. Or if type that into the chat, which polarity, you know, do you navigate more with ease, and how does that show up in your life? Alan, you want to say a little bit about challenge support, how you navigate with ease and how that shows up in your life?
Yeah, happy to, Gemma. Well, I guess I was thinking in a professional context. I think I'm quite good at providing constructive feedback and not flinching from that when it can be challenging. And I think one of the ways, and I think the fact that I'm also quite supportive of people and encouraging of people, that means that people are also more willing to receive my feedback constructively. So I think the fact that I can do both reasonably well, or I invest quite a lot of effort in both, together helps to nurture good, balanced relationships with the people to whom I'm giving feedback. Although that said, I do sometimes get it wrong and go too far on the challenging side. And I have, there has certainly been some episodes of that where I've been out of balance, and that has messed up, at least for a while, a relationship that I've been in.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the example. That is, that speaks to like the mutually reinforcing nature of them, right? One that really spoke to me is how, because you're so supportive. So when you really do go into challenge, it helps people to really take that. And also, I also hear you say you also have a slight preference to challenge, right? And sometimes that can come out. Very nice. So, okay, Natalia, you said direct in power. You want to say a bit about there?
Well, I have a child, and direct usually doesn't work with him well. Yeah, and I'm a coach, so actually I mix this all the time. So I can like be direct and also like ask people or like try to make them come with options and do them. So usually they do better, but sometimes I need also to be direct in some situation. Yeah, so.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, raising a child and coaching, there are quite a lot of similarities, isn't it?
Yes.
I can see how both situations require direct and empower. Awesome.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, we have a new one here. Bernard, do you want to say about intervene, hold back? I think somebody else said that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's just this question of, when am I very present and interacting and bringing in my thoughts, and when I let things go. And I think, again, what I find interesting in observing how polarities work out is it's dynamic. So it's about moving between the polarities. Another way of thinking about it would be, no, you have to search the middle ground. I think that's, and I have this actually as a question to you, Gemma. Are there polarities where that's kind of the idea, find the middle ground? And are there other polarities where it's more about moving between the two sides? There's more stability, more dynamics within the polarity. Is there kind of a different way that polarities play out?
Okay. I mean, there are definitely different applications to how we use this, right? So I think it depends on, hold on. It depends on how we define what is the middle ground, right? Like to me, the middle ground is the productive zone where we are taking the benefits of both poles, right? So, one of the 4 classical Chinese Confucius books is called the Middle Way, like the middle way, right? So to me, the middle way is not like an average of both or a compromise, right? So it is really this type is how when we are in this productive zone where we are reaping the benefit of both poles, right? Without veering leaning too much into one pole or the other, where the overuse comes and bite us. Yeah, and when we talk about complex leadership theory, so I will talk about another like application, which I call it to enable the integration, right? So that is maybe another way we can think about it. So hold on to it. We can continue to talk about when we have the resonance conversation. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So everybody is thinking about, and then let's inverse this. So for the same list, which polarity is more at your growth edge, right? And how does that show up in your life? Like when you see this, you can very quickly immediately recognize which one you lean a bit too much on. I can tell you, it's not on this list, it's on the other. So KPI has two assessments. One is leadership assessment, one is human KPI assessment. It's on the human KPI. It's called take seriously, hold lightly. I mean, the minute I saw that polarity, I immediately know I have a very strong preference of take seriously, and how that has come and bite me. So it's like the awareness it generates is amazing. So anyone would like to say which you recognize that you have a more of a strong preference, hence it's more at your growth edge?
Can you explain that one more time? I'm not wrapping my mind around that exactly. Is it like where we could use improvement on managing? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it's like which one is more at your growth edge? A lot of difficulties, challenges, tension in your life come from, having a strong preference to one pole in one of the polarity pairs.
See, the preference, I think, is what's holding me up. I mean, I have a clear preference in when I am in that space, but it's challenging to manage the polarity and maintain a balance.
Okay, so we'll address that in a minute. Let's hear from Alan again. It seems like he's identifying one. So let's hear Alan's growth edge.
Oh dear, not again. Thank you, Gemma. Action, reflection. So I mean, it's not a preference. It's more comfort. I'm more comfortable with reflection because I've spent, I used to be an academic. I've spent more time, too much time, frankly, on the conceptual and theoretical end of things and not enough time on the practical implementation, which I find a great shame because to me, the learning loops, the two-way learning loops between theory and practice are absolutely crucial. So I am taking conscious steps to try and rebalance and try and move to action more quickly. So maybe there's some things there about conscious effort and about comfort rather than preference, and maybe also about learning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I mean, I completely identify with that because that's the world I live in as well. So much reflection, talk about it again, and again, right? So yeah, I mean, preference can come from comfort, like you said. It can come from how we are conditioned, what our environment tells us is better. Was prized as we're growing up, or there are also significant limiting beliefs that tell us one is better than the other, right? So there was another one. Okay, so Svetlana, is that how you call your name?
Yeah, almost Svetlana.
Okay.
Yeah, I can comment. I used to be a very task-focused person, pretty much achievement-focused. One of the definitions of my managerial style was the one who can move the mountains. So I decided at some point that this drive is not something optimal neither for the team nor for myself. And the best way how you learn, how you transform yourself and how you face your fears, that's actually you need to deep dive into the area where you feel the least confident. For me, this was exactly leaving the stability of employment, especially when you're a manager and you define how we move on, and jump into the position where you can influence through the knowledge, expertise, or questions and transformative activities together with the rest, but you are not the one who is making decisions. So that was one change. And another one's obviously switching more towards relationships, because when you're coaching the person, they are in the focus, not you are as a manager. So pretty much facing the fears if you want to learn and grow outside of your comfort zone.
What a beautiful example. What a beautiful example. Thank you so much. Yes, right. So that is it's so a key thing to know about polarity is not either or, it's both and, right? So we're not saying give up stability or give up task focus. What we're saying is a movement of expansion, right? So it's like if you're right-handed, we're not saying become left-handed. We're saying become more ambidextrous, right? So be able to leverage both hands, right? So that
Yes,
is
exactly. And the best way to do it is by doing it. So instead of, being constantly in reflection, so you switch to the other pole, and in such way, through the practical activities, you grow towards the other side. And if you were already outside the middle zone, then you move yourself to the middle zone in a particular field where you have this imbalance.
Yes, very, very, very well said. Yeah, Barbara, you have your hands up.
Yeah, I was thinking about the task focus, relationship focus in terms of like our work, right? So as a consultant, I often go into companies and you can see where that particular polarity is weighted, right? Okay, this organization is everybody's task focused. I mean, because I've moved the paper from one side of my desk to the other, job done. And part of the goal of a lot of our work is to get people or inside the organization to see the relationship of their work, both to the other parts and to the overall goals and outcome of the organization. Does that make sense? Is that sort of yeah?
Yes, that definitely is a very relevant application of it. At the team level, what are the team's preference, right? So absolutely, yeah. I mean, very quickly you can see what teams I work with are more relationship focused, which are more task focused, right? So again, there's not a right or wrong or better or worse, right? So the thing is, there is the range. If you're leaning too much into it, teams usually are stuck in the overuse of that preferred pole, right? So that is where you need to bring interventions are needed. So probably Kinsey, I'm wondering, so let me see if that answers your question, because Jocko already prepared me for this question, right? So there is this idea of, is this context specific, right? So of course it's context specific. I mean, to me, this is the polarity between identity, what's our core, right? So we probably all born into the world, with a preference to our hands, probably just, through nature and early nurturing. So we probably all have a little bit, different preferences for different poles that we lean more naturally into. So that is pretty steady. And then there's also the adaptive part that is to the context that we are in, right? We don't always show up this way, right? I mean, case in point, I just did a leadership KPI debrief with a client, and she said, this result actually surprised me. And she said, because that was my identity, my natural tendency is I prefer stability, right? But this assessment is showing up that I'm actually preferring change, right? I'm preferring change. So, and then what happened is she is going through a lot of change. She's changing country, she's changing job, she's just navigating a lot of changes. So that's the adaptive, she's adapting to what is going on in her life right now, where it really requires her to lean into the change and navigate it effectively. Yeah, so does that make sense? So there is that polarity again. There is our core practice, and then there is the adaptive part of it. Okay, so well, I think breakout is out of the question. So yeah, we're not doing the messy breakout, but still, I just wanna as one maybe seed plans on you as a reflection is to think about the polarities. There are infinite numbers of polarities. So think about the polarities at play at your work. That is very much present to you, and think about the benefits of healthy use of each pole. And then think about the consequences of overuse of each pole, right? And then think about what is your preference and how does that preference show up in your life? You know, how it serves you and how it limits you. Yeah, good deal? Good deal? So it can be a daily, it can be a daily exercise you do. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Then I would say a few things, and then we can take a quick little pause on questions before we dive into complexity leadership theory. Okay, so this picture is a very famous Chinese idiom, and it's called mark the boat to retrieve your sword, probably basically. So the story goes, there's this guy, and he's boating with his friends, and then his sword, his very cherished sword, fell into the water. So I mean, at that time, we probably just could think of a sword as a watch or something. You know, it's a personal decoration of the time, right? And where the sword fell, the water was deep, was running fast. There's no way they can go dive in and retrieve the sword. So the friends were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry this happened to you. What are we going to do about it? You know, the sword is lost." And this person said, "Don't you worry about it." He said, I'm going to mark the boat exactly where the sword fell. And when we arrive on shore, where the water is shallow and it's slow, I'm going to dive in and get my sword. Right? So that's the story. Right? So mark the boat to retrieve the sword. Right? I mean, the point is, it's like that's complex nervous system. It's changing all the time, right? So this state of whether we call it a balance or we call it integration or we call it harmony, or like Carl Jung calls it the transcendent function. In his the conscious, unconscious, or a state of transcendence. It is not a fixed state. So that's what I find in my coaching. A lot of times people feel like there's a fixed state you can attain where you are permanently well, insured against all bad things this polarity can bring you. There's no such thing, right? It's not a fixed state. It is very much context specific to time, space, and people, right? To the situation that you are in, right? So Therefore, understanding the polarity pattern is only beginning of the adventure, right? It is ongoing process, lifelong work. And I just feel this quote from Master Nan said it all. Is that change is constant, and there is a pattern to change, right? I mean, to me, this describes the complexity, simplicity polarity. It's the constant change, and we're not knowing the direction of a change that we can control the direction of change that brings about the complexity. Yet there are patterns, simple patterns that drive the change that can help us understand it. So it's very important for us to know that, right? So it's like, you actually can measure polarity, then we'll get it conquered. No, it's not. It's a step towards more understanding, but it's not a fixed state, right? So, and I just use this slide to say, there are whole fields of study that are focused on, whole fields of study, whole books that are focused on just one polarity, right? Like this book, The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, and it's about the success-failure polarity, how success can change to failure and vice versa, right? And this book I'm recently reading is called Rest, and it's about the work-rest polarity. And I just find it so illuminating because, so many times, like our culture has goes wrong because at its very DNA, at the value, right, we put one pole on top of the other, right? We created this inequality between the two poles when they are created equal, right? So like in the American culture, we put work above rest, and somehow we think of rest as some inferior form of work, or or something you have to do in order to get to. It's like, right? And that's where we see there's so much burnout and in the work culture and everything, right? We can trace it back in the DNA and see how, these two polarities are set up in the culture, in the big cultural context, right? So, and then this whole red book by Carl Jung is about the conscious unconscious polarity, right? Just the point is like there's not an end state where we can achieve with polarity. It's very much an ongoing thing. And however, it's hugely, hugely, hugely valuable to talk about polarity. And in my life, there were three ways that it showed up in my professional life. The first way it showed up is the fastest way to arrive at clarity, right? Any given situation, you ask, what are the polarities at play? And what's the relationship like between the two poles in each polarity that is at play? Right? So I give you an example. The work unit at Colorado State where I'm working, we're hiring a new director. And last week we interviewed three candidates, right? So this is my little inner dialogue, okay? So like this candidate, between exude warmth and exude competence, she's exuding way too much warmth, right? So she's making everybody feeling really nice, but I got no idea what's her agenda. What's she gonna do with this? Like, I don't know what's her competence, right? So that's my inner dialogue. I'm like, okay, this candidate, he's doing well with the exuding competence, exuding warmth, but he said his leadership style is delegative. Now that raises a flag for me between direct and empower, right? If he may be one who leans way too much into empower. Now, and how is that going to play with the currently leaning way too much into direct style leadership going on? Is it going to create two systems that's going to make my life even harder to manage two, like a bipolar bosses? Or is this going to create an integration that's actually going to help the organization? Right? So this is like my little inner dialogue going on when I was interviewing and evaluating the candidates, right? Any situation. What are the polarities at play, and what's the relationship between the two poles, right? So where's the balance? Where is the out of balance? Okay, and a second way this shows up is the fastest way to go deep in coaching. So like I alluded to, there is this Polarity Navigator as a coaching tool from the Key Polarity Indicator training. So I have to say, the conversation just goes deep so fast. Right. And I think the reason is because we're only playing with the two poles. There's really nowhere to hide. Right? Versus a complicated model, there's so many variables, takes up a lot of the mental energy. Right? Here with polarity, it's just two poles. It's so simple and elegant. And the whole focus is on the coachee's experience. Right? So after we reflected on the two poles and we talk about the transformational third way, right? So what might look like when we bring in the benefits of both poles, right? What might expanded identity look like? And that's so attractive, because very quickly as we work through the polarity, people would say, oh, wow, I'm like walking on one leg. No wonder I'm not walking fast. Right? So the immediate creative tension is how might I grow the other leg so that I can walk on both legs, right? So the transformational third way, it's so attractive because it's so expanded. It's a lot bigger expanded. And the vulnerability third way is there are reasons why we would be holding on so closely to this one, to one of the poles, right? Have the preference because there are some big assumptions, as in adult development, the competing commitments that is fueled by the big assumptions and their limiting beliefs, and sometimes their emotional wounds that we need to heal and let go of to release the energy, to the expansion, right? So that is a second way to show up like hugely valuable in polarity. And I would just have to go this real quick. This is going way too fast. A third way is it helps you and help me understand like really models with multiple variables, right? So there are always the fundamental polarities at play. Like the Clemson framework, like I'm sure most people here are very familiar with, right? It has four domains, and with the middle domain, the middle is really the in-between space. And then I would say it's really exploring the linear nonlinear relationship right? Or the emergent is the relationship to change, right? So on the left side, it's non-predictable and unpredictable, the direction of change. On the right side, it's predictable, right? And then coming down here, the I Ching or the Book of Change. I mean, it has 64 hexagrams, and it's all up around the yin and yang, and then coupling that with phenomena in the nature, right? And then it becomes an oracle system. So and fundamentally, it just talk about, the yin and yang, the two fundamentally created forces there. And here is another thing, another strategic doing that I use quite a lot in my work. And it has 10 rules, right? Really a sophisticated model to talk about how we do strategy. And at the bottom of it, it really talk about the two poles is how do we navigate the polarity of design and do, right? Or thinking and doing. So that is a third way show up hugely valuable is very quickly, polarity helps us get a grasp of what very, very sophisticated, complicated model is talking about, the foundational of it. Okay. How is everybody feeling? Am I overwhelming you? Let's say what are the questions or reflections or resonance you want to share just real quick, maybe 2-3 minutes before we head out to this big thing? Yes, Yulia, please.
Hi, thank you very much. Very, very engaging. I think you mentioned 2 terms that I would really love you to maybe clarify for me a little bit. You said that there can be a way of putting something to primary boundary, and in the next paragraph somewhere you said to the gross edge. Do you think that this is the synonyms? Are they different? In which way? How they relate one to another?
You said growth edge and a primary boundary? Is that what you said?
Yeah. You were explaining that, for example, putting part of my identity to primary bound, right? Or then you said, okay, where are you putting this to growth edge? So if you can explain where you see them, maybe graphically, or maybe in between yin yang, or in between the pair of column, or.
Are you talking about when I was talking about diversity, unity, polarity?
Yeah, I think so. One of them was there.
So I think what I was speaking to is the adaptive nature of it. So it's like, so we have both poles available to us, right? Depending on the context. So, right, when the team, so like the example I gave, so you're working on an cross-disciplinary team, and the team is really splitting apart. The tension between, the connection, the boundary, right? So the polarities are overlaying, right? So the boundary between the disciplines is really pulling the team apart. So now for you as a leader, so it's probably helpful for you to lean more into the unity part of your identity, right? To really to help hold the team together, because that brings in the energy of the connection, helps with creating the balance in that polarity while it's at play.
Yeah. Well, what I assumed is if there is primary boundary, is there secondary, tertiary boundary, or is it terra incognita?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure you can dig deeper into it, but that was really beyond my scope. I was mainly just talking about, the connection, boundary, polarity, and how they play out.
Yeah. I was just, trying to double check so that I do not invent something, on the go. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, each polarity you can double click and it becomes more polarities, right? But I didn't dig that deep. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Tiani?
Yeah, I was thinking about when you were talking about, you showed the image of and you were talking about how you define what imbalance means.
Yes.
And it was kind of like a band, really. A band that maybe with like less oscillation between extreme and at different extremes, maybe. And is that definition an individual one, case by case, contextual? Is it, for example, if you think you're being balanced. Like it says, I think I'm being in a balanced approach, but there's a lot of tension with the environment. What does that mean then? Does that mean then you're out of balance, or is it making a choice to kind of swim upstream versus kind of thing? Like there's something there that I think could be interesting to talk more about.
Yes. I mean, that brings the adaptability part of it, right? So there is a certain way that a certain natural way, absence of the external pressure, that what balance looks like for you, right? But then when you couple that with the environment you are in, and then it would look different, right? So yeah, you can, I mean, I don't know how to create a graph like that, but it would be very interesting. So this person is in this wave, right? And when there is external wave comes in, where maybe either the preference is the same, with reinforcing, or the preference is different, balancing, what might that look like?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a core question about how does one show up in teams and with others in families?
Yeah.
The interaction of the different preferences and how that shows up.
Yeah.
Beautiful question. Okay, Anand?
So I mean, I'm loving your talk, Gemma. It's fantastic. Thank you. What I'm thinking about is if one is in a complex social system, having trying to work out how to move forward individually and collectively, and say you manage to get everybody is kind of appreciating the potential value of thinking in terms of polarities and balance. But everybody also has their own view and their own position and their own perspective about what would be an appropriate sort of balance, about what blend of the different polarities would be suitable, would be appropriate in that particular context. So then my question, and this is kind of very much part of relating to the work that I'm doing, is how can one bring in to polarity management and thinking about polarity management, consideration of the distribution of power and the relational power dynamics in the complex social system. I'm not expecting a quick one sentence answer to that, but that was just to let you know that's some of the things that I'm thinking about. So basically bringing power and relationships into thinking about polarity management in a complex social system.
Yes. I would say keep practicing and then come back, give us a talk. I mean, that's so, that's such a absolutely crucial question. So yeah, how does it show up in the team with the context and then add that to the power and relations? There's not an easy answer, but it gives all the key words you are touching. It gives us perspective to examine what's going on. Yeah,
You're in trouble now, Alan.
Opera is going to hold you accountable.
I am, if I see somebody that I think can give a talk, it's like, I'm on you. So be prepared.
Hey, Gemma, it's so nice. I also have a Chinese background, and I just migrated to Europe. You make me really, really proud to have a Chinese heritage. With all this great stuff. Yes. Anyway, so I'm kind of so at my practice is in an in-between state. I'm a computer scientist, but I also, like you, I have also a language background. So I'm just thinking that a lot of you can say I'm a software architect. Sometimes the one who sort of invents the language of polarity, sort of frames the discussion. I'm just trying to probe the language for sets of polarities may not be as binary always as sleep and awake and yin and yang and that sort of thing. So what is your view on the objectivity or the objectiveness and the subjectivity of the polarity language? And also bringing into the picture Dave Snowden's sensemaker framework. He always used this triangle to do this micronarrative interpretations, or sort of that there's a three three-way polarity, if you know what I mean. So yeah, just trying to see how can we navigate this the fluidity of the human language per se in this polarity framework.
Yes, very, very beautiful question. Back to, the quote from the Tao Te Ching, I said, Tao gives birth to one gives birth to two gives birth to three gives birth to everything, right? So, I mean, that is the fluidity there, and we are talking about polarity in a pair, right? To me, it is almost as a portal, as the bridge between the one, the creative force, and the many, the everything, that Tao gives birth to everything, right? So you can talk about 3, you can talk about 4, you can talk about 10, you can talk about whatever number there is. So even, I mean, I'm familiar with the sensemaker framework and the triangle. I'm actually very curious. Like another philosopher I like, Forrest Landry, and he likes to use triangles as well. And triangle is one of the most stable structures in life, right? It'd be very interesting to see how 2 derives into 3, right? And then how 3 derives into 4, or how 2 derives into 4. I mean, there's infinite wisdom we can derive from there, and infinite fluidity. It's definitely not binary. Yeah. Does that address that?
Yeah. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and that plays, Bernhard, are you still here? Because in the chat, he was sort of, he used the word arbitrariness. Like, are the polarities arbitrary? And then he also used the word spectrum. Is it more, and is he still here? Because I'm just babbling. But you see what I mean? It's like it plays into that language
I'm
question.
here, yes.
Okay, good. Talk.
No, it's interesting because I was just writing an answer to what Jean said, because I find it very important that we consider these things like polarities or also the triads as tools to make sense of the world. And as tools, they are part of the observer world and not of the observed world. So there is no necessity in a certain polarity over another one. You might say, well, there is peace and war. Well, there could also be peace and some social kind of unrest. Well, so which one is more true? Well, there is the objective world doesn't give you an answer. It's what you choose. And I like this idea, what I put in the comment with colors, because when you have a spectrum of colors, what's the opposite polarity of red? There is nothing in the nature of colors that says it has to be yellow but not green or something like that. It doesn't work like that. But you can choose to do that. And what I proposed, and actually that's a question I have to leave that for later, but I can put it now, that I have to Gemma is, I don't know whether you're familiar with the work of George Kelly, the repertory grid as a method of constructivist psychology. It dates back to the 60s, but he uses polarities very much. And what I love about this is that he basically, to make it very short, the idea is that you ask people to compare things that are relevant to them. So if you talk about family, compare your mother to your father, compare your sister to your aunt, and so on. And then you find out how do you compare them. And these criteria, so one is more outgoing, the other is more introvert. Oh, apparently outgoing versus introvert seems to be a polarity with which you are operating and making sense of your world. Now, this means that for this system, if these things are repeated, you can say this seems to be a relevant polarity. And I'm using this actually for teams and organizations. So where you say, I'm not coming with some kind of categories from some university that say that's what the world is like, but I let you develop your relevant categories and then we work with these polarities. And I think there is a wonderful connection both from this polarity thinking that I didn't know. So thank you very much for making this known to me, and this constructivist aspect of psychology, and complexity thinking, because also there I think you could much, when you talk in complexity thinking about path dependency and contextuality, where what the things that are contextual seems to be much more dominant than the things that they share with any other contexts, which sets some boundaries to the scientific approach, which wants to only find out laws that are then applicable to all the contexts. So if we say, well, let's leave that aside and go into the individual context and find out what is relevant for the individual context, and there use the polarities. And there now you have a connection, because the system is, of course, at the same time observing and being observed. It's observing itself, and that's the relevant word for that system. And then you can derive the polarities from then. And by that, I think you accept that polarities are a tool and are not somewhere in an objective reality.
Yeah, I would say it's both. To me, there is, the most personal is also the most universal. So when we say we definitely construct polarity. So when we do coaching, sometimes we will let people name the polarity that is relevant, that makes sense to them. Right? There's definitely the constructive, context-specific part, and it is universal. When you say arbitrary, I mean, there's a male-female arbitrary? Is there day and night arbitrary? That's the way the world works. Right? And polarity is not some human invented thing, but it's definitely a expression of the human wisdom to uncover the universal dynamic that is at play. So I would say it's both. It's the personal and universal polarity at play, depending on how we apply it. But of course, for us as consultants and coaches, it probably the more constructive side comes into place. But we should never lose sight that it's not something that we invented. It is the dynamic that has played, like gravity. So I would say that was how I would respond to that. Yeah. Boy.
Okay, we have one more hand up. I think we should take that one, and then we'll move on with the rest of your talk. But you have blown up the chat. I hope you're happy and proud of yourself, Gemma. Bernard, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Okay, we have one hand up, and you will have to.
I will have to, announce, because
okay.
I cannot change my name, unfortunately, from Cyrillic. So those strange letters are Cyrillic.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Gemma, for beautiful stories. One thing I want to thank you especially about the coming into the space of team you never met and creating this fast trust and this ability to create this. I loved this, because as facilitator, I know but never noticed it. And thank you very much for this point. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to add two thoughts. First, now I'm in the School of Jungian Coaching. And this red book, it's really beautiful work. And also what we were learning there is that Jung has been commenting a book of Chinese prediction system.
He actually wrote the foreword for the English translation of it, right? Oh my
yes.
God, one of the best essays. Yes.
And he's been using it also in his approach of explaining yin yang, and what is played in Jungian coaching is that archetypical level of images is kind of scaled down to individual interpretation, but it's rather not to unify, but to define and understand differentiation. And this is bringing the polarity and then bringing the unity. So it's like, it's really it's an interesting approach. But also, we had recently a forum of business facilitation in Ukraine here in Kyiv. And cases we also were discussing that really important for team when we run facilitation on values. Mm-hmm. And quite often when you're coming, it's reflecting to what Hin has mentioned about this language, is when you're losing a typical name of value. Mm-hmm. Everybody say, we're for this value, but the real understanding what's behind this one word is it can be different. So quite often we're bringing the work into polarity. We are polarizing partly this word. This unity is more identified. Quite often it can be even polarized to have a bigger spectrum of understanding what actions are hidden behind this one word. And sometimes it brings just bigger spectrum of understanding what can team do, having this in heart. And yeah, from one hand. From the other hand, it can, what you mentioned about the DAO, that one value through this discussion can bring to space two different values.
Yes. In terms of the value conversation, that's spot on. So many times when we set our value, it's set tipped one pole of polarity above another. That for sure will derive into a lot of challenges. So when we're facilitating a conversation, we really need to be very careful to tend to whatever value is stated, to tend to the tension that is in the value, right? So yes, definitely. And I would say Carl Jung definitely is one of the most prominent Westerners, right? That is very really get the idea of polarity. And another person, what's his name? What's that guy? The Matter with Things and Master and His Emissary? Ian McGilchrist. Ian McGilchrist is another one. And your point about the unity bringing thing, that's actually a very quick way a person can identify the niche. When you look at the team or the society industry, what are the leaning pole of what is the pole that whole area of people lean more towards? Like in my field, everybody is so prizing their deep expertise. Everybody is very invested in their diversity identity. When somebody who can relate to people primarily from unity, so that is what my niche is. Is to help infuse, that energy from that pole to bring about the balance. Yeah. So that's another perspective we can utilize it. Okay, I know Jocko and Barbara are probably like, Gemma, how are you gonna move on?
You can listen if you can go as long as you want, Jocko. Right? But I think we should probably move on to your last section so that the audience can say. But thank you so much for that question. It was awesome.
Okay. So let me move on, and I would just say I'm no stranger to this community. If you all want to hear more from me, I can definitely talk more. So, but let's quickly just get a very quick version of what complex leadership theory is, because based on what all we have talked about, this should be very easy to grasp. Okay, so you think about the change. Okay, so there are two types. These two types of leadership is very widely talked about. Entrepreneurial leadership, that stands for the pole for change, innovation, and operational leadership, that is the pole to stability, right? So that is very well studied in leadership literature. So there's a new idea coming up from entrepreneurial leadership. So what happens more often than not is it hit the metaphorical brick wall. Right? So instead of having an adaptive response to the challenge, it's an order response, right? It could be the adaptive pressure is ignored, it's just explained away. How many times, an opportunity to change is explained away back to business as usual. Quick fixes introduced, right? Or new ideas were able to develop a little bit, but it hit the brick wall. It never spread to the bigger point, right? So my doctoral advisor taught me, and he said, the empirical evidence shows between generating new ideas and introducing the ideas from entrepreneurial system into the operational system, the latter is so much harder than the former. We don't lack good ideas. What we lack is a reliable system to bring the ideas into the bigger picture. In other words, it's the integration. It's a relational in-between space, right? So here you go. And what complex leadership theory theorizes is we need this in-between space, what it's named adaptive space, right? So that it's a space that it's a special kind of leadership called enabling leadership, so that the ideas, they can connect and conflict together, right? I mean, even connect and conflict, they are two opposing tendencies that can be put in a polarity, So because the conflict speaks to the boundary part of it, the idea wants to maintain its boundary, and connect speaks to the desire for ideas to connect and develop into something bigger, right? So, I mean, that's basically it. We need a third kind of leadership. And the polarity as the play here, we can say it's between creativity and performance, learning efficiency, change stability, explore, exploit, or risk managed, risk averse. There are many different terms that have been used to describe this tension, but that's really universal. And so here's a quote: in complex leadership, the key is to engage the tension between the push for novelty in entrepreneurial, i.e. entrepreneurial, and the push for stability and results, i.e. operational. This tension dynamic at the heart of complexity is at the heart of complexity and the adaptive process, right? So, and this is the complex leadership framework. So basically, right, so along the line of emergence, so new ideas come up from the entrepreneurial system, and then eventually you want the new ideas to be incorporated into the formal system so that it help increase the capacity of the system. Otherwise, it remains a local fad, right? So in order to do that, we need this third type of leadership called enabling leadership, and that holds the adaptive space that helps enable the integration. So, right, so it's called an adaptive space, not an adaptive system, because it's fluid, it's dynamic, and it's a constant liminal space to enable integration, right? So that's what I think is like, if change is constant, if the dynamic of interplay between change and stability is universal, why can't we hold a constant space to enable its integration? So that's basically complexity leadership, and we can also overlay that with the generative emergence, which is another very strong field of study in complexity science, to think about how generative emergence happens, right? It starts with something that tips the system into disequilibrium. Can be internal, adaptive pressure, somebody wants to do something different, can be external, opportunity pressure, that something changed in the external system, like for example in team science, the change of the funding landscape, right, tips the system into disequilibrium, and new ideas start to develop, people start to experiment, and then we need to amplify these ideas so that a new way of doing things can emerge, and then gradually it gets incorporated into the new order. And now that's the way we do things here, and they really so this process of how generative emergence happens corresponds very, very beautifully with the leadership actions that leaders can take to enable and enact and support this generative emergence process. So in a nutshell, the enabling leadership is really the new contribution from complex leadership theory, right? And this constant force to help with the integration between these two forces. So that's basically it. And I have many examples. I won't be able to. Oh, I would just play here, right? To translate this quote in the complexity leadership context, Tao give birth to one is what we can say is Tao is like a vision or an intent, right? Like a source. Somebody got this idea that is the Tao, the creative force of our organization. Right, it gives birth to this one organization, this one human collective, right? And then one gives birth to two is any organization has to contend with these two forces towards change and forces towards stability, right? And two gives birth to three, and these three we can see it as the three types of leadership. Entrepreneurial, operational, and enabling leadership, especially the third enabling leadership, right? And then three gives birth to 10,000 creatures. If these three types of leadership work together in harmony, and then the organization will thrive and come up with many beautiful creations. So, and I have many examples from my work that we don't have time to go into, probably another talk. But I just want everybody to walk away with these key things, right? One is we can intentionally create balance, and two is we can enable the integration of the two poles, right? And come to a transformation third way, or generative emergence with a new order. And we as what David Silverman called anthro-complexity. We as humans, we have intent and agency, and we can very intentionally influence knowing how the dynamic works. Okay, that's it.
Oh, thank you, Gemma. That was so good. And there are questions. Kinsey, would you like to, you seem to have two, I think there's two in there, but would you like to ask your question first?
I can. I need to scroll back and pull them up. I have all kinds of questions and comments, so I'd love to chat with you sometime, Gemma.
Okay.
Let's see.
Okay, go ahead.
Context for me is that my work is Africa-based field work for like 25 years. And so when I think in terms of polarity and duality, it's very much in terms of binaries and colonialism, coloniality, and how it persists in the present day. And so one of the key mechanisms of colonial control was qualitative difference in valorization, and making those distinctions, not just difference and classified, but inferior and superior. And so I see that too in organizations and in teams where certain skills and disciplines are prioritized or valorized more. For instance, I was working as a subject matter expert recently for an AI company, and there was such a differentiation in terms of like STEM and non-STEM, which is something I mentioned in response to one of Jocko's comments. So I wondered if you note that and address it when you have engagements with clients, or if you're not concerned, or if this addresses that in part, which I can see where that would be the case. So is that clear what I'm asking? Just if you experience that and notice it and how you address it. So.
Yes, I notice it all the time, right? Like I said, any given situation, right? What are the polarity at play and what's the relationship look like, right? So recently I was listening to a podcast about divine feminine, divine masculine, which is another very potent polarity. And the person said, we need to have the divine masculine and divine feminine fall in love again. I was like, wow, this is such a beautiful analogy. It's like, are the two poles in love with each other? Are they living, happily together ever after? Or are they butting heads? Are they fragmented and they're fighting? Right? So I noticed that all the time. I mean, this is definitely a very quick way to help arrive at clarity. When you think about this colonism thing, I mean, and certain traits put above another. I mean, what came to me is a diversity unity polarity. It's like this is a case where we're leaning way too much into the diversity, the different races, right? So, and we completely lost sight of the unity pole, where it is the one that from the one came everything else, and we are, as a human family, there's a tremendous unity. So this colonism and all these race things, a quick way to understand it is that we are suffering the consequences of leaning too much into diversity and losing sight of the unity pole, the unity, the oneness of humanity.
And that's why occurred to me as you were speaking, is that this is a great way of addressing that polarization in the US without invoking the DEI aspect, which is now polarizing. And so this gets at that without using the terms that are now too laden to really use.
Yes, it right. I mean, it comes in fashion, it comes out of fashion, right? So all we're doing is we're exchanging one overuse for another overuse. We're still out of balance, right? Okay, Jocko?
Yeah, I was wondering if you wanted to comment on One of the things that I bring up a lot with polarities or the opposites is that with each of the polarities contain within them their opposites. Is that something you'd wish to comment on?
Yeah, I would say yes. And like for example, like the diversity unity, right? So when you double click the diversity one, and then there's male, female, masculine, and feminine, right? As you double click on the unity, there is a small a unity with a small u and a unity with a big U, right? Like the unity with a small u is like that one, and the unity with a big U is like the Tao. So yeah, I would say yes. And the polarity, the embedded nature, right? And then there's also the hierarchical nature of polarities. So it's yes, it really derives into many forms. So one book I'm reading right now is called Both and Thinking. So it's very much about this topic, and that book addressed this, embedded and hierarchical nature of polarity.
Marco, I made a comment in the chat that is kind of an example of that. Doing research in Africa, I realized at some point that I was a third gender because my behavior didn't conform to the way women were expected to behave. And I interacted with men. And so I was usually positioned with them in social situations. So that, what you just said makes me think of that dynamic that I've lived with for a long time.
And that really spoke to me because, the same thing happened when women began here in the West, when women began entering the workforce in large numbers. Like the biggest compliment a lot of our bosses back in the old days used to be able to pay to us was like, you're one of the guys, you work just like the men. And, that was bizarre, but it's that kind of thing where they have expectations of these polarities.
Yeah.
And, and that is, I think, for me, Gemma, that was a really interesting part of your talk, is the expectations that we bring to these polarities, like what that behavior actually entails.
Yes. And right, I mean, a lot of the issues you think about, okay, masculine, feminine. I mean, a lot of times it's like at the culture level, right? One pole is put above another pole. One pole is seen as superior to the other pole. It's completely against the principle where those two poles are equal, right? So men and women, men are considered superior to women, right? And the men is set as a reference point, the standard for women, right? Work is superior than rest, right? And then still there's a movement. Right, movement is superior to stillness. Right, so it's like we can see at the DNA level how there's defect, and then that manifests the many things that the consequences we show of the overuses.
Yulia, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I've been thinking a lot about how the polarity has become the biggest topic of the year, if I may. So it is like almost everywhere. The IDG Summit is called Bridging Polarity this year. And it is like Bridging Polarity is one of the tools of the inner development goals. But also as a intercultural management person, I'm also thinking about the Schwartz values, and you said femininity, masculinity, Hofstede, and everything. So we have the ideas that are very well researched from the social data, from the values perspective. And for example, if we're talking about Schwartz, so this is like self-direction, stimulation, which is altogether is openness to change, versus conformity, tradition, security, which is conservation. And the same thing with the giving ourselves away, or giving something to others, or taking from others, right? So this is an interesting thing. I want to ask you, as a person who studied complexity leadership theory from the source of the people who created this, are they referring to these theories and data as well, or are they trying to present it as a something new and sexy on the market of consulting?
Oh, are you saying is your question more like complex leadership theory with the polarity philosophy baked in it?
No. I'm asking if such things as well-researched theories on, for example, Schwartz value system or Hofstede intercultural portrait. So do they refer on the data of those polarities as well, or are they trying to create something purely kind of business oriented, leadership oriented as a new wave of tools? That's my question, because there is a lot of tension on the market of, I've created a new framework, take a look. That's something new, not something like old and so on. What I hear from your way of saying this is how beautifully you combine the Tao, the yin and yang into something, as a new thing. So my question is, what about these three initial authors? How do they position? Where do they stand? Data-wise?
Okay, I see. I mean, this integrating polarity with complexity is totally my thing. I didn't hear anything about polarity from my doctoral advisor at all, right? So that was actually, how you would fall in love with something not knowing why until later, so that was my case. In my world, Tao lives in one corner and complex lives in another until recently, they were connected and presenting you with this case. So the origin story with complex leadership theory is really all the co-authors, they're very interested in complexity science, as in the natural sciences, especially in the nonlinear thermodynamics, etc. And they were very interested in translating the insights of the complexity science into leadership theory. So that was basically it. And then they developed based on a bottom up way of change happens, as I was saying, the generative leadership. In terms of, I don't know, I don't think they've consulted the frameworks you talk about. I would say the most they consulted is the complexity science leadership, the complexity science literature. And my doctoral advisor said in 1990, my doctoral advisor has a book called The Edge of Organization, published in 1999, in response to a person said, what was the French? There was a leadership scholar said, we've been talking about the same old stuff. Again, we are now entering into the new century. Can leadership develop something new? He said really, he read that in the early 1990s, he said, really need to do something. So that was the genesis of how he developed, and the three of them met and developed it. And then in terms of consulting, actually, I would have to say the complex leadership theory, I personally have not seen it used in consulting. Its influence has primarily stayed in academia, in academic. So, my hope is I could bring it more into practice. And I would say what is new, what my doctoral advisor claims to be new about complex leadership theory is that space and enabling leadership. So that's why the polarity lens makes so much sense to explain its practicality.
Okay. I don't see any more hands up. The chat is very full. I
have a hand up. I'm trying to put a hand up.
Oh, okay, Kinsey, go ahead, please. Thank you, Yulia.
There's something that I'm just really, really taken by, that's making me, it's a frame for everything I've ever done. Because you've been working towards systemic change for all this time, and what my formal work experience has been as a museum curator working with African and contemporary art. For me, it was more of a method. As an anthropologist, it was more of a methodology than a vocation. And what I found was, and I did deliberately, was the objects became a third space. So there was a third relationship. So the the tension between the contemporary and African, which was the core of my research. That was, conceptual, it was historical, and temporal, and spatial, because the architecture divided them. It was a way of triangulating conversations so that they weren't confrontational. And two things that resonated. When you were talking about how it was funny that you go into these situations and you're not known, but you have this relationship of trust, it makes perfect sense, because you're like not the third person, you're a third relationship. So you're outside of that context, which is how I kind of felt like my position was. But the next step in terms of scale of that, the Tao phrase that you mentioned, where 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and 3 becomes 10,000. That's why I was working that way, was creating that third space. And then that had, not ripples, but it had an impact on that space and on the people that entered that space. And I was wanting to address cultural stereotypes. And then it just kind of expanded from there. And there was a network of us, like in the US and Europe and Africa, not very many at the time I started, but we were working not intentionally in cooperation, but in dialogue with each other. And so it gets to that, that third space that I was working with, and it became like thousands and thousands. And so I love that leap in terms of the systemic change that I've always thought in terms of in complex systems, the potential for impact and influence. So.
Yes, you see, there's nothing so practical as a good theory. So what you're saying is, so this polarity is helping you to explain what's going on in life, right? So that's very beautiful. Yeah. Well, you all are still here. I just say one last thing I'm saying is that I have been offering a Polarity Experience, which is a 1-hour coaching session, free, no charge at you, to very quickly help me build up my muscle with this KPI, a new way of coaching. So if you all are interested, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. So somewhere I'll put my LinkedIn there, or you can just search my name. You can find me. I love to just have in-depth experience to really help you have a felt sense of polarity. So NIR, the company where I received the training, and it said its mission is to raise the both and awareness on the planet. And I was like, wow, we just at this point in time, as Yulia was saying, it's like becoming. Because it's like what got us, how in leadership and management we say, what got you here won't get you there. Humanity is the same, what got us here won't get us there. There was so much either or thinking in what got us here, right? So what is going to get us there? The next stage of human evolution, we really need a lot more both and thinking. So I'm really committed to this, and I'd love to have a polarity experience with you if you so choose. So over to you, Barbara.
Okay, well, that's a big offer. This crowd might take you up on it. Be careful what you wish for. But yeah, I was is there anyone else? I don't see any other hands. Jocko, can we save the chat, because it was full of very interesting little nuggets? And if there's no other questions, Gemma, I'd really like to thank you. This was a wonderful talk. You ignited a lot of conversation in the chat. You've given us another way to think about complexity, another lens to think about complexity through, and that's what we're all about here. So thank you very much. Please come back anytime if you want to talk more about polarity or wherever your research leads you. We'll be delighted to see you back here. Thanks to all of you, because we love it that you come along for the ride and that you're engaged with the speakers. It's always awesome. Thanks to old friends, thanks to new members. I see a lot of new members out there. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. Be sure to join us. We have a lot of good speakers coming up. You'll see the announcements, and thank you very much.